How can we understand it? What components does it have? And what are the necessary conditions to develop it? And why it is important for our ethical choices? We shall attempt to answer these questions in this lecture.
One of the ideas of conscience is provided by the myth represented by Furies. The Furies punished people who acted against the moral law, physically tearing them apart sometimes. This image provides us with the idea that conscience is something that has a universal nature, is behind of us, and when we don't obey it, we will suffer emotionally and even physically. Interestingly, some of the myths tells us the story of a person punished by Furies when in fact a person acted badly because they were forced to by circumstances rather than by bad intentions.
Socrates, don't worry, this is not Socrates, this is San Giovanni, San John, true light that gives light to every man, but they have much in common. So Socrates, one of the first significant philosophers in ancient Athens, he understood conscience as an inner voice. From this definition, we can imagine conscience as the part within us, which informs us about good and evil, which we can choose to listen or not. It was this inner voice which led Socrates to make his decision to receive the death penalty for teaching the truth. Similar ideas are found in Christianity, where conscience is identified with the voice of God. It is similar to the idea of Socrates. This reflects the idea that conscience is not like a universal law, but something which is adapted to the particular situation and context and has in view a longer time perspective of human life, which is known to God and which God let us know by conscience. Jesus, the main figure of Christianity, prays in the Garden of Gethsemane before being delivered to death. He has two options, taking the cross or not, escaping it in some way. It is the voice of God which lets him discover what is the right way to act. A similar idea is found in the famous story, first a book and later a movie, Quo Vadis, written by Polish novel writer Henryk Sienkiewicz. Peter wants to leave Rome during Nero's persecution of Christians, which seems logical. He can't help other, and possibly he can help other communities in other regions. On the other hand, his presence and martyrdom in Rome proves to be necessary to give birth to the Christian Church. Both situations show a person facing a moral dilemma with reasons on both sides. The person finds a solution which is not based on some universal law, but is something which we can express in lay terms as context-adapted instruction. It means a solution to a particular situation where both alternatives would bring some moral good. Which alternative is better is not clear for the person, but trusting in his/her conscience, she hopes that it is God's voice, believing that God sees more than she can at this moment, even if the action taken includes pain. Maybe you remember the famous words of Martin Luther, who was forced by the church to withdraw his 95 Theses. Perhaps you watched the movie Luther starring Ralph Fiennes. Luther, facing a moral dilemma between promised obedience to his superiors and on the other hand the possibility of death for disobedience followed the voice of his conscience telling him not to withdraw. Instead, he declared, "Here I stand. I can do no other. So help me God. Amen." Cicero, a Roman philosopher, provided a definition of conscience which unveils the next aspect of a conscience, common knowledge, which in Greek is syneidesis. This is one aspect that is not evident in the other definitions such as the inner voice or voice of God, because it is referring to something that not only do I know, but everyone else does too. So it is not something which only I hear, which only I experience inside me, but which probably other people experience too, and understand the rule by which I made my decisions. Therefore, this definition opens the space for living together. Cicero's intuition about conscience is reflected by the understanding of conscience as social moral judgment. Another aspect to understanding conscience is discovered by Immanuel Kant, a famous philosopher and author of the categorical imperative, which we will encounter in later lectures. He defines conscience as the internal court of justice. He gives us the idea of some instance in us that is weighing good and evil on a scale. Why is good good and why is evil evil? This answer is provided in the categorical imperative. So, taking decisions about good and evil, we have above all to think and decide based on some criteria, unconditional moral obligation, described as categorical imperatives. Moreover, conscience can be understood as a moral identity. In other words, one part of our self-identity, the way we understand ourselves, how we may describe ourselves, what we think about ourselves. Moral identity is the degree to which being a moral person is important to a person's identity. In other words, the importance of morality to a person's identity. Moral identity can also refer to certain schemas, cognitive maps, which are morally relevant. For instance, you may know or have heard that speaking disrespectful of somebody is morally bad. However, answering under a post on the internet, you write bad comments about a person. If the connection between what you want to do, giving a comment about somebody on the internet, and your knowledge about the wrong character of this activity is connected in your mind and interpreted, a moral person not right in such a way, and at the same time you have a motivation to be a moral person, you have a schema ready, and you can resist not to do that. So, conscience as moral identity, concepts of moral psychology, explains in a psychological way why one person acts morally, ethically. What are the conditions necessary to develop one's conscience? First, it is your empathy and compassion which help you to feel that you have behaved badly towards another person. Secondly, you have to have a cognitive capacity and be ready to listen to other persons in order to understand the arguments that one is giving for his action. Thirdly, you have to value yourself as a human being, as you are, and not because of what you have done. This will allow you to be self-critical and accept the criticism of others. If you accept only a morally good side of yourself and you identify with that, it is very easy for you to hear and interpret the critical voice as something which may destroy you. Fourthly, you have to have knowledge of rules, norms, and moral principles. Only by knowing them can you judge whether your action is good or bad. If the companies don't explain their motives and their rules and make sure that people know about them, even the well-developed conscience of the person employed may lead to negative outcomes. Last but not least, in order to develop their conscience, people need to have experienced justice in their childhood. So, in other words, if as child you have always been treated unfairly and punished for good actions and appreciated for bad ones, such as stealing, beating others, telling lies, etc., it will be extremely difficult for you to develop a sound conscience in the future. So, please be aware of different aspects of the conscience. It is something which punishes us when we don't obey certain moral norms. Something which we hear in our head, which is telling us how to behave, even if it may harm us to do so. Something which we have in common with other people, as Cicero says, or it is like an inner court that is weighing good and bad arguments against each other. Count. Moreover, it's our moral identity, our self-definition as a moral person. In order to develop conscience, we have to feel empathy, listen to others, be self-critical, know the rules, and have experienced in the past the good actions being appreciated and bad being considered as harmful and can be punished.